This is the true account of the Wolf of Soissons, a massive predator that terrorized the countryside around Soissons, France, during the winter months of 1765 through 1766. The beast killed at least 37 people, mostly women and children, in a reign of terror that lasted nearly 18 months. This case is remembered not only for the extraordinary size and cunning of the wolf, but for the widespread panic it caused across northern France and the suspicion that multiple wolves may have been responsible for the killings. Even after hunters claimed to have killed the creature, attacks continued, leaving the region haunted by the possibility that other wolves still prowled the forest. The winter of 1765 arrived early in the region around Soissons, bringing with it bitter cold that froze the rivers and left the roads treacherous with ice. The forests that surrounded the ancient city stretched for miles in every direction, dense with oak and beech trees that had stood for centuries. These woodlands had always harbored wolves, but the packs typically kept their distance from human settlements, content to hunt deer and wild boar in the deeper parts of the forest. The first attack occurred on the 12th of December, 1765, near the village of Braine, roughly 10 miles northeast of Soissons. Marie Dubois, a girl of 14, had been gathering firewood at the edge of the forest when something emerged from the shadows between the trees. The other children with her later described a wolf of extraordinary size, gray and black in color, with yellow eyes that seemed to glow in the winter light. The beast moved with a speed that defied belief, covering the ground between the forest and the girl in mere seconds. The attack was witnessed by several villagers working in nearby fields. They described hearing Marie's screams, then seeing the enormous wolf dragging her into the undergrowth. By the time the men reached the spot with their farming tools, only torn clothing and blood in the snow marked where she had been taken. A search party formed immediately, following the trail of blood and drag marks that led deep into the forest. They found Marie's remains nearly a mile from where she had been attacked, partially buried under fallen leaves. The size of the tracks in the snow around her body stunned even the most experienced hunters in the group. The paw prints measured nearly 6 inches in length, far larger than those of any wolf the villagers had encountered. The local priest, Father Antoine Moreau, examined the scene and declared that no ordinary wolf could have inflicted such devastation. Word of the attack spread quickly through the surrounding villages, carried by traders and travelers who passed along the roads connecting the scattered settlements. 3 days later, on the 15th of December, the wolf struck again. This time, the victim was an elderly woman named Claudette Rousseau, who had been walking alone on the road between Soissons and the village of Septmont. Unlike Marie Dubois, Claudette had been attacked in broad daylight, on a well-traveled route where such incidents were virtually unheard of. A merchant's wagon came upon the scene shortly after the attack, finding the road blocked by the woman's overturned cart and scattered belongings. The merchant, Henry Beaumont, later told authorities that the wolf had not fled when his wagon approached. Instead, the beast had stood over its victim, watching the approaching horses with what Beaumont described as calculated intelligence. Only when the merchant shouted and cracked his whip did the wolf retreat into the forest, moving with a peculiar gait that suggested it might be injured or simply extraordinarily large. This second attack sent shockwaves through the region because it violated every assumption the local population held about wolf behavior. Wolves were known to avoid roads and areas frequented by humans. They hunted at dawn and dusk, not in the middle of the afternoon. Most importantly, they feared humans and fled at the first sign of their presence. This wolf seemed to operate by different rules entirely. As December progressed, reports of wolf sightings multiplied across the countryside. Farmers found livestock killed in their fields, often with only small portions consumed, suggesting the predator killed for reasons beyond simple hunger. Shepherds refused to take their flocks to certain pastures, and many began carrying firearms instead of the traditional wooden staffs they had used for generations. The third confirmed attack occurred on the 23rd of December, when 10-year-old Pierre Lefebvre disappeared while checking rabbit traps with his older brother near the village of Cuffys. The boys had separated to cover more ground, a common practice that had never before resulted in tragedy. When Pierre failed to return to their agreed meeting point, his brother began searching the trapline. He found clear signs of a struggle near the riverbank, including scattered trap contents and deep claw marks scored into the bark of nearby trees. The search for Pierre lasted 4 days and involved more than 100 volunteers from surrounding villages. They found his body on the 27th of December, approximately 3 miles from where he had vanished. The discovery revealed disturbing new details about the wolf's behavior. Unlike the previous victims, Pierre had not been dragged away immediately. The evidence suggested he had survived the initial attack and attempted to escape, climbing a large oak tree before the wolf managed to bring him down. The implications of this discovery troubled the hunters and trackers examining the scene. It indicated a level of persistence and determination rarely seen in wolf attacks. Most wolves, when faced with fleeing prey that reached safety, would abandon the hunt in favor of easier targets. This wolf had apparently waited at the base of the tree, possibly for hours, until the boy was forced to come down. By early January 1766, panic had begun to spread beyond the immediate vicinity of the attacks. Merchants reduced their travel along certain routes, and many villages imposed informal curfews, particularly for women and children. The local authorities in Soissons, led by Mayor François Bertrand, began organizing regular armed patrols along the most dangerous roads. The fourth attack, on the 8th of January, 1766, marked a turning point in how the region viewed the threat. Catherine Moreau, the 18-year-old daughter of Father Antoine Moreau, was attacked while walking to market in Soissons. Unlike the previous victims, Catherine survived, though she suffered severe injuries to her arms and legs. Her account provided the first detailed description of the wolf from someone who had faced it and lived. Catherine described a wolf unlike any creature in the natural histories she had read. She estimated its length at nearly 6 feet from nose to tail, with a shoulder height that would allow it to look a grown man in the eye. Its coat was primarily gray, with darker markings around the face and legs. Most disturbing were its eyes, which she described as showing an intelligence that seemed almost human. The wolf had not simply attacked in a frenzy of hunger or territorial aggression. It had stalked her for several minutes, moving parallel to the road and studying her movements before launching its assault. The fact that Catherine had survived was attributed to the thick winter coat she wore and her father's training in self-defense. Father Moreau had taught his daughter to carry a knife and knew how to use it effectively. During the attack, she had managed to inflict several wounds on the wolf, causing it to retreat before inflicting fatal injuries. The blood trail from the wounded wolf extended for nearly half a mile into the forest before disappearing at a rocky stream bed. The survival of Catherine Moreau galvanized the local authorities into organizing the first formal hunt for the wolf. Mayor Bertrand contacted the regional governor, who agreed to provide both funding and experienced hunters from the royal forest. The hunt was scheduled for the 15th of January, 1766, and would involve more than 40 armed men, including professional hunters, local militiamen, and volunteers from the affected villages. The hunt leader was Captain Jean-Baptiste Duhamel, a veteran hunter who had served in the royal forests for more than 20 years. Duhamel had previously organized successful hunts for problem wolves in other regions and was considered one of the most skilled trackers in northern France. He arrived in Soissons on the 12th of January and immediately began studying the attack sites and interviewing witnesses. Duhamel's preliminary investigation revealed several disturbing patterns. The wolf showed remarkable knowledge of local geography, often using streams and rocky terrain to obscure its tracks. The timing of attacks suggested careful observation of human routines and travel patterns. Most significantly, the size and spacing of the paw prints indicated they were dealing with a wolf far larger than any recorded in the region's history. The captain also noted inconsistencies in the witness accounts that troubled him. While most descriptions agreed on the wolf's extraordinary size and gray coloration, some witnesses reported slightly different markings and behavior patterns. Duhamel began to suspect they might be dealing with more than one animal, possibly a mated pair, or even a small pack operating in coordinated fashion. The hunt began before dawn on the 15th of January, with the men divided into 4 groups positioned at strategic points around the forest. The plan was to drive the wolf toward the main road, where the largest group of hunters waited with firearms and spears. Local farmers had been enlisted to serve as beaters, making noise to flush the wolf from its hiding places while staying safely behind the armed hunters. The operation proceeded smoothly for the first several hours. The beaters moved methodically through the forest, searching ravines and dense thickets where a large predator might take shelter. By midday, they had covered nearly half of the planned search area without encountering any sign of the wolf. Some of the volunteers began to suggest the animal had fled to more distant forests, recognizing the threat posed by such a large hunting party. At approximately 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the hunters made their first significant discovery. In a small clearing near the center of the forest, they found what appeared to be the wolf's primary den site. The area showed clear signs of recent habitation, including bones from various prey animals, tufts of gray fur caught on thorny bushes, and a strong scent that lingered in the cold air. The examination of the den site revealed new disturbing details about the wolf's hunting pattern. Among the bone fragments, hunters identified human remains, including pieces of clothing and personal items from several of the known victims. This confirmed that the wolf had been bringing its human prey back to this central location, behavior that was extremely unusual for wolves, which typically consumed their kills at or near the attack site. More troubling was the discovery of tracks from multiple wolves around the den. While one set of prints matched the large paw marks found at the attack sites, there were at least 2 other sets of smaller tracks, suggesting the presence of additional animals. Captain Duhamel immediately revised his assessment of the threat, warning the hunting party that they might encounter more than one predator. The hunters' caution proved justified when, shortly before sunset, they encountered not 1 but 3 wolves moving through the forest approximately half a mile from the den site. The largest of the 3 matched the descriptions provided by witnesses, standing nearly 3 feet tall at the shoulder, with the distinctive gray and black markings. The 2 smaller wolves, while still larger than typical wolves of the region, appeared to be females, possibly the mate and offspring of the larger male. The encounter began when one of the hunting groups, led by local militia sergeant Paul Duchesne, spotted movement in a dense stand of pine trees. Duchesne signaled for his men to halt and take positions behind cover, but before they could properly organize their formation, the largest wolf emerged from the trees and began moving directly toward them. The wolf's behavior during this encounter reinforced the witnesses' claims about its unusual intelligence. Rather than fleeing or charging blindly, the animal seemed to evaluate the threat posed by the hunters, moving back and forth at the edge of rifle range, while apparently studying their positions and numbers. The 2 smaller wolves remained hidden in the trees, suggesting a level of coordination that went beyond simple pack behavior. Sergeant Duchesne, recognizing that the wolf might escape if they waited longer, gave the order to fire. 3 muskets discharged simultaneously, their reports echoing through the forest and alerting the other hunting groups to the encounter. At least 1 shot appeared to strike the large wolf, which stumbled and let out a howl unlike anything the hunters had ever heard. The sound was deeper and more resonant than a typical wolf's call, carrying for miles through the winter air. Rather than fleeing after being wounded, the large wolf charged directly at the hunter's position. Its speed across the forest floor was remarkable, covering the 100 yards between the tree line and the hunter's cover in what seemed like seconds. Several of the men barely had time to reload their muskets before the wolf reached their position. The close-quarters battle that followed lasted only minutes, but left a lasting impression on all who witnessed it. The wolf fought with a ferocity that exceeded anything in the hunter's experience, using its size and strength to devastating effect. 2 militiamen suffered serious injuries before the combined efforts of the hunting party brought the animal down. Even as it lay dying, the wolf continued to struggle, requiring multiple additional shots before it finally succumbed. The 2 smaller wolves, meanwhile, had vanished back into the forest during the commotion. Several hunters attempted to track them, but the approaching darkness and the need to tend to wounded comrades forced them to abandon the pursuit. Captain Duhamel ordered the hunting party to withdraw to Soissons with their prize, planning to return the following day to search for the remaining wolves. The body of the large wolf was transported to Soissons on the 16th of January, where it was put on public display in the town square. Citizens from throughout the region traveled to see the creature that had terrorized their communities for more than a month. The wolf's size impressed even those who had heard the witnesses' descriptions. Measured from nose to tail, it extended nearly 7 feet in length, with a weight that exceeded 100 pounds. Local officials declared the threat ended and organized the celebration to mark the successful conclusion of the hunt. Mayor Bertrand announced that normal travel and commerce could resume, and many of the special precautions implemented during the terror were lifted. Captain Duhamel was honored with a formal ceremony and rewarded for his leadership of the successful hunt. However, not everyone shared the official optimism about the threat's end. Several witnesses to the forest encounter expressed concern about the 2 wolves that had escaped. Father Moreau, whose daughter had survived the wolf's attack, warned that the remaining animals might prove even more dangerous now that their pack leader had been killed. Hunting traditions suggested that wolves sometimes became more aggressive and unpredictable after such traumatic events. These concerns seemed validated when, on the 22nd of January, just 6 days after the celebrated victory, another attack occurred near the village of Vailly-sur-Aisne. The victim was Thomas Blanchard, a 40-year-old farmer who had been checking his winter wheat fields. Unlike the previous attacks, which had primarily targeted women and children, This assault on an adult male suggested that the remaining wolves had become more aggressive or desperate. Thomas survived the attack, but suffered severe injuries to his legs and back. His description of his attacker matched the smaller wolves that had escaped during the forest encounter. He reported that the wolf had approached him cautiously, almost hesitantly, as if testing his defenses before launching its assault. This behavior differed markedly from the bold, direct attacks attributed to the larger wolf, suggesting different hunting patterns among the pack members. The news of the new attack cast doubt on the authorities' declaration that the threat had ended. Public confidence in the government's ability to protect its citizens began to erode, and many of the precautions that had been relaxed were quietly reinstated. Merchants again avoided certain routes, and parents resumed the strict supervision of their children that had characterized the height of the terror. Captain Duhamel, still in the region completing his official report on the hunt, acknowledged the possibility that additional wolves remained in the area. However, he pointed out that organizing another large-scale hunt would be difficult and expensive. The January hunt had required significant resources and had succeeded only through careful planning and favorable circumstances. Finding and eliminating 1 or 2 remaining wolves scattered across a large forest would present much greater challenges. February 1766 brought a series of attacks that confirmed the worst fears of the regional population. Rather than diminishing after their leader's death, the remaining wolves seemed to have become more active and more aggressive. Between the 3rd of February and the 28th of February, 7 more people were killed in attacks scattered across a wide area around Soissons. The pattern of these new attacks differed significantly from those attributed to the large wolf. The victims were found closer to the attack sites, suggesting the remaining wolves lacked either the strength or the inclination to drag their prey long distances. The wounds were typically less severe, but more numerous, indicating different hunting techniques adapted to smaller predators. Most disturbing was the apparent coordination between the surviving wolves. Several attacks showed evidence that multiple animals had participated, with different sets of tracks found around the victims. This suggested that the 2 wolves that had escaped from the January hunt had maintained their pack behavior and were actively hunting together. The attack on the 8th of February provided the clearest evidence of this cooperation. Anne Rousseau and her 12-year-old son Michel were traveling the road between Soissons and Braine when they encountered the wolves near the same location where Marie Dubois had been killed 2 months earlier. Unlike previous single-victim attacks, both mother and son were killed, their bodies found approximately 50 yards apart. The physical evidence at the scene indicated that one wolf had attacked Anne while the other had pursued Michel, who had apparently tried to flee toward the village. The coordination required for such an attack suggested that the wolves had planned the assault, possibly observing the travelers' approach and positioning themselves accordingly. This level of strategic thinking was unprecedented in recorded wolf behavior. Father Moreau, now serving as an unofficial advisor to the local authorities on the wolf threat, proposed that the surviving animals were operating under extreme stress following the death of their pack leader. He suggested that their increasingly bold and coordinated attacks represented a form of desperate retaliation against human encroachment on their territory. This theory gained credence when, on the 15th of February, the wolves attacked a group of 4 armed hunters who had been tracking them through the forest. The hunters, led by a local man named Philippe Dubois, brother of the first victim, Marie, had discovered fresh wolf tracks near the abandoned den site and were following the trail when they were ambushed. The attack occurred in broad daylight in an area where the hunters should have had clear visibility of any approaching threats. The wolves appeared to have used the terrain to their advantage, approaching from downhill along a creek bed that provided natural concealment. The assault was swift and coordinated, with both wolves attacking simultaneously from different directions. Philippe Dubois died in the attack, while 2 of his companions suffered serious injuries. The 4th hunter, Jean Martel, escaped by climbing a tree and firing his musket repeatedly until the wolves retreated. His account of the encounter described wolves that seemed to be operating with clear tactical awareness, using natural cover and coordinated movement in ways that suggested careful planning. By March 1766, the wolf situation had evolved from a local crisis into a regional emergency that attracted attention from the royal court in Paris. Reports of the attacks had spread throughout northern France, creating concern that similar problems might emerge in other forested regions. The failure of the January hunt to completely eliminate the threat had also raised questions about the effectiveness of traditional wolf control methods. The governor of the Ile-de-France region, acting on orders from Versailles, authorized a second major hunt to be organized with resources drawn from across northern France. This hunt would be larger and better equipped than the January effort, with professional hunters recruited from multiple provinces and military units provided to assist with logistics and security. The organization of this expanded hunt took nearly 2 months, during which the wolves continued their attacks. The period from the 1st of March to the 30th of April saw 12 additional killings, bringing the total confirmed deaths to more than 40. The attacks had also expanded geographically, with incidents reported as far as 20 miles from Soissons in multiple directions. The expanding range of attacks led some observers to speculate that additional wolves might be involved beyond the 2 that had escaped in January. Captain Duhamel, recalled from other duties to lead the new hunt, acknowledged this possibility, but pointed out that hungry wolves could travel great distances in search of prey. The unusual behavior patterns might simply reflect the stress and desperation of the surviving animals. The second hunt was scheduled to begin on May 1st, 1766, with more than 100 armed men participating. The expanded scale of the operation required detailed planning and coordination between multiple jurisdictions. Villages throughout the region were asked to provide men and supplies, while the royal government supplied additional firearms and ammunition. Unlike the January hunt, which had focused on a specific area around the original den site, the May operation was designed to cover the entire region where attacks had occurred. The participants were divided into 8 separate groups, each responsible for searching a designated sector. The plan called for systematic coverage of all potential wolf habitat, with particular attention to areas where recent attacks had taken place. The May hunt began with better preparation and intelligence than its predecessor. Local authorities had compiled detailed maps showing all known attack sites, den locations, and frequently traveled wolf paths. Professional hunters had studied the available physical evidence and developed theories about the wolves' preferred hunting grounds and escape routes. The hunt also benefited from improved weather conditions. The spring of 1766 had been mild and dry, making tracking easier and improving visibility in the forest. The absence of snow meant that the wolves could not use their traditional advantage of silent movement across frozen ground, while the hunters could move more quickly and quietly through the undergrowth. The first significant contact occurred on May 3rd, when the hunting group covering the sector north of Soissons encountered fresh tracks near the village of Crouy. The tracks appeared to belong to 2 different wolves and were less than 12 hours old, indicating that the hunters were close to their quarry. Captain Duhamel immediately repositioned 2 additional hunting groups to block potential escape routes from the area. The strategy proved effective when, late in the afternoon of May 4th, the wolves were spotted moving through a valley between 2 ridgelines. Unlike their behavior during the January encounter, the animals immediately fled when they detected the hunters' presence. The pursuit that followed lasted nearly 3 hours and covered several miles of difficult terrain. The chase ended near the village of Paisley, where the wolves became separated while attempting to cross the Aisne River. One wolf successfully reached the opposite bank and disappeared into the forest beyond, but the second became trapped on a small island in the middle of the swollen river. Surrounded by hunters on both banks, the wolf had no escape route except back into the water. The final confrontation took place as the sun was setting on May 4th. The trapped wolf, identified as one of the females that had escaped in January, fought desperately to break through the ring of hunters surrounding the island. Multiple shots were fired, but the difficult lighting conditions and the need to avoid hitting fellow hunters on the opposite bank made accurate shooting nearly impossible. The wolf was finally killed when it attempted to swim toward the eastern bank, where fewer hunters were positioned. As it struggled through the deep water in the center of the river, hunters on both sides were able to coordinate their fire effectively. The animal succumbed to its wounds in the shallows near the eastern shore, where its body was recovered the following morning. The death of the second wolf was greeted with cautious celebration in Soissons and the surrounding communities. Unlike the premature victory declaration that had followed the January hunt, local authorities were more measured in their assessment of the threat level. They acknowledged that one wolf remained at large, but expressed hope that the elimination of its packmate would force it to abandon the region. This hope seemed justified during the remainder of May and most of June 1766, when no confirmed wolf attacks occurred in the area. Merchants resumed normal travel schedules, and parents allowed their children greater freedom of movement. The regional economy, which had suffered significantly during the months of terror, began to recover as normal commerce and agriculture resumed. However, the apparent peace was shattered on the 28th of June when Marie Lacroix, a 16-year-old girl from the village of Berzy-le-Sec, disappeared while gathering herbs near the forest edge. Her body was discovered 3 days later, showing clear evidence of wolf attack. The discovery confirmed that at least one wolf remained active in the region and suggested that the threat was far from over. The June attack differed from previous incidents in several important ways. The wolf had made no attempt to conceal or move the body, leaving it in the open where it was easily discovered. The wounds were more extensive than those typically inflicted by the smaller female wolves, suggesting that the surviving animal might be a previously unknown male, possibly larger than the two that had been killed. Captain Duhamel, still in the region completing administrative tasks related to the May hunt, examined the scene and found evidence that supported this theory. The paw prints around the victim were larger than those attributed to the female wolves, but smaller than those of the original large male. This suggested they were dealing with a third wolf, possibly an offspring of the original pair that had reached maturity during the months of hunting. The discovery that a third wolf might be involved forced a complete reassessment of the threat. If the original pack had included offspring that were still alive, the problem could persist indefinitely as the younger animals reached breeding age and established their own territories. The traditional approach of hunting individual problem wolves might prove inadequate against a population that could replenish itself. Local authorities faced a difficult decision about how to respond to this new development. Another major hunt would be expensive and disruptive, and there was no guarantee that it would be any more successful than the previous efforts. On the other hand, allowing the attacks to continue would undermine public confidence and could lead to a resurgence of the panic that had characterized the winter months. The decision was made to organize one final, comprehensive campaign to eliminate any remaining wolves in the region. This effort would be different from the previous hunts, focusing on long-term elimination rather than quick resolution. Professional hunters would be stationed permanently in the area, tracking and eliminating wolves systematically over several months rather than conducting intensive short-term operations. The campaign began in July 1766 with the establishment of hunting stations at strategic locations throughout the affected region. Each station was manned by 2 professional hunters and supplied with firearms, traps, and provisions for extended operations. The hunters were instructed to study local wolf populations comprehensively, mapping den sites, travel routes, and feeding areas to develop a complete understanding of the remaining threat. This methodical approach proved more effective than the large-scale drives that had characterized the previous hunts. By August, the hunters had identified and destroyed 3 additional den sites and had documented the movements of what appeared to be 2 remaining wolves operating in different parts of the region. The systematic pressure gradually forced the wolves to alter their behavior, making them more cautious and reducing their effectiveness as predators. The campaign achieved its first major success on the 15th of August, when hunters stationed near the village of Chivres succeeded in trapping a male wolf that had been observed in the area for several weeks. The animal, while large, was smaller than the original wolf killed in January and showed signs of injury that suggested it had previously survived encounters with humans. The final confirmed wolf of the pack was killed on the 3rd of September, 1766, near the same location where the first attack on Marie Dubois had occurred nearly 9 months earlier. This wolf, a female, had apparently returned to the area where the terror began, possibly seeking familiar territory as hunting pressure intensified throughout the region. The death of this wolf marked the end of documented attacks in the Soissons region, though isolated sightings continued to be reported for several months afterward. The hunting stations were maintained through the winter of 1766-67 as a precaution, but no additional evidence of wolf activity was discovered. By spring 1767, the stations were disbanded, and the region was declared officially free of the wolf threat. The Wolf of Soissons left a lasting impact on the region that extended far beyond the immediate casualties and economic disruption. The attacks had demonstrated that traditional assumptions about wolf behavior were insufficient to predict or prevent such incidents. The intelligence and adaptability shown by the wolves challenged conventional understanding of predator-prey relationships and forced a reevaluation of human vulnerability in rural settings. The incident also highlighted the limitations of existing governmental structures in responding to regional emergencies. The months-long delay in organizing effective countermeasures had allowed the problem to escalate far beyond what might have been necessary with quicker intervention. This experience led to reforms in how such threats were assessed and addressed by royal authorities. Perhaps most significantly, the Wolf of Soissons became part of the folklore and cultural memory of northern France. Stories of the attacks were passed down through generations, often growing in the telling until the wolves achieved almost mythical status. The incident served as a cautionary tale about the dangers that could emerge from the forest and the importance of maintaining vigilance against threats from the natural world. The terror also left physical changes in the landscape around Soissons. Several of the locations where attacks had occurred were avoided by local residents for years afterward, allowing them to revert to wilderness. New roads were constructed to bypass areas considered dangerous, and some villages relocated entirely to more defensible positions away from dense forest cover. Educational institutions throughout France began incorporating the incident into their curricula as an example of natural history and crisis management. The detailed records kept during the hunts provided valuable data for naturalists studying wolf behavior, while the governmental response became a case study in administrative coordination and resource allocation. The Catholic Church in the region also drew lessons from the incident, with several priests incorporating references to the wolf attacks into their sermons about divine providence and human vulnerability. Father Moreau, whose daughter had survived the original attack, became a respected commentator on the spiritual implications of the terror and the community's response to crisis. Despite the apparent resolution of the immediate threat, several aspects of the Wolf of Soissons incident remained unexplained and continued to trouble observers for years afterward. The original size and apparent intelligence of the largest wolf exceeded anything documented in contemporary natural histories, leading to speculation about possible hybridization with dogs or other factors that might have produced such an unusual animal. The coordinated hunting behavior exhibited by the wolves also puzzled naturalists of the period. While pack hunting was well documented among wolves, the level of strategic planning and tactical awareness demonstrated during several attacks suggested cognitive abilities that challenged existing understanding of animal intelligence. Some observers suggested that extreme hunger or environmental pressure might have forced the wolves to develop enhanced problem-solving skills. The question of how many wolves had actually been involved in the attacks was never definitively resolved. While 4 wolves were killed during the various hunting campaigns, witness accounts and physical evidence suggested that additional animals might have been present at different times. The possibility that some wolves escaped detection and fled to other regions remained a source of concern for neighboring communities. Modern analysis of historical records has raised additional questions about the incident. The pattern of attacks, the apparent coordination between multiple predators, and the unusual size of at least one wolf have led some researchers to speculate about environmental factors that might have contributed to the phenomenon. Climate records from the period suggest that the winter of 1765-66 was particularly severe, possibly forcing wolves to alter their normal hunting patterns and prey selection. The social and psychological impact of the terror also deserves consideration in any complete account of the incident. The months of fear and uncertainty fundamentally altered relationships within affected communities, creating suspicions and tensions that persisted long after the wolves were eliminated. Some families left the region entirely, while others armed themselves and adopted defensive measures that changed the character of daily life. The Wolf of Soissons represented more than just an unusual predation event. It was a collision between human civilization and the natural world that revealed the fragility of both. The incident demonstrated how quickly the established order could be disrupted by forces beyond human control, and how difficult it could be to restore security once it had been lost. The memory of those 18 months of terror served as a permanent reminder that the wilderness retained the power to reclaim what humanity thought it had conquered. The final accounting of the Wolf of Soissons includes 41 confirmed deaths, though some historians believe the actual number may have been higher. The economic cost of the terror, including disrupted commerce, abandoned agricultural activities, and the expenses of the hunting campaigns, was estimated at more than 10,000 livres, a substantial sum for the region at that time. More than 2 centuries later, the Wolf of Soissons remains one of the most thoroughly documented cases of wolf predation on humans in European history. The incident serves as both a historical curiosity and a sobering reminder of the complex relationship between human communities and the natural world that surrounds them. In an age when such encounters have become increasingly rare, the terror that gripped northern France during 1765 and 1766 provides a window into a time when the boundary between civilization and wilderness was far less secure than it appears today. The forests around Soissons still stand, though they are smaller now and more carefully managed than they were in the 18th century. Wolves returned to the region in the late 20th century as part of natural migration from other parts of Europe, But these modern wolves bear little resemblance to the creatures that terrorized the countryside more than 200 years ago. They are smaller, more wary of humans, and carefully monitored by wildlife authorities who have learned from the lessons of history. Yet sometimes, on winter nights, when the wind howls through the trees and shadows move at the edge of vision, residents of the region remember the stories their ancestors told about the winter when death stalked the roads of northern France. The Wolf of Soissons may be gone, but the memory of what it accomplished in 18 months of terror remains as a testament to the power of nature and the vulnerability of those who believe they have tamed it completely.